Welcome, everybody. We've got another episode of With Sonar, and we are happy to bring this episode of With Sonar for the Global Trade Tech Summit event. It is a fantastic time so far. We've seen a lot of great demos, and I'm joined by, of course, my co-host, Kyle Taylor. If you watch us Wednesdays live at 4 p.m., Kyle is here. And then we've got a guest joining us today, Henry Byers, our ocean maritime expert. Thank you for joining us as well.
Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So have you guys, any demos that you've seen so far, or any pieces of the summit that have stuck out to you?
Absolutely. I think Gene Soroka this morning was, the Port of Los Angeles has never been more important to the domestic freight network.
Especially right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. And I think what they're looking at, trying to just automate those processes and trying to just create more visibility is similar to the methodology that we're trying to produce as well. So it's really nice to see that not only is that happening within FreightWaves community, but throughout the entire supply chain, especially that one being the most lagging, I would think, in bringing visibility with track and trace and with what's available, where are your containers and things of that nature. And absolutely. Henry, you coming from that community, was that prevalent back when you were working for 4PL looking at international?
Yeah, certainly familiarity with how much data they're dealing with and how disparate and dirty it is, and cleaning it all up. For an industry that's so old, you're talking about hundreds of years old, it's tough for those guys to kind of make that leap into the modern age. And I think they've certainly worked a lot with General Electric on that port optimizer and done very well at it. And I think now they're ready to really launch it and get it out into the market.
Awesome, good stuff. Now, Henry, just for some of our viewers here, a couple of the folks that watch the show, they know. So Kyle and I, we both came from the North American truckload industry. You both worked at 3PLs here. You yourself, you've worked in truckload, but your experience goes a little bit beyond that. Just give us a little bit of background on yourself.
Yeah, I've actually been on both sides of the third-party logistics industry, you could say. Started with Access America Transport here in Chattanooga back in 2013. Went through the merger with Coyote, then was acquired by UPS. And when that happened, I made the leap to international. Just realized how different the international industry really is from the domestic freight industry. And got back with the guys from Access America at Steam Logistics. Worked there for 4.5 years, was director of pricing and business intelligence, and fell in love with the data set we're going to talk about here today, and that's what led me here to FreightWaves. That's
awesome, good stuff. And they're an MVOCC?
They are MVOCC and freight forwarder. They started back in about late 2013, early 2014. So that would put them around 6.5 years old probably.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's really. I think that's really valuable experience, because to tie all this stuff together, anybody that's involved with freight right now, I think understands how volatile the market is right now, especially the domestic truckload market. But and your experience working on both sides of that, I think it's really valuable to be able to see when a lot of folks look at truckload or just North American surface transportation, right? It's easy to see, oh, the market's going up, everybody's shipping a lot, but they don't really see where it all comes from. And I think as the years go on and decades continue to move forward, less and less freight is produced here domestically, and really we're reliant on shippers moving freight in overseas, right? Yep. Is there a ballpark figure as to how much of our volume, truckload volume, just comes from ocean? I know it varies a little bit by source, but
yeah. Well, when you talk about mode, when you're talking about truckload specifically, if we're talking about dry van, for instance, a lot of probably over 70% of all is what we estimate. Dry van truckload volumes originate overseas. So you're talking about the dry van truckload industry specifically being, massively dictated by what happens overseas and how these volumes are reacting, how, much volume is being produced, and that's where a lot of the leading indicators end up being for that specific segment of the market.
Awesome. What's been, what are some of the things that folks who aren't as involved in, say, don't have as many hands or the experience looking at the ocean side, maybe folks like Kyle and I, we only work in transportation or surface transportation. How can they leverage this information? I guess how can they use it to their advantage?
I think when you're looking at, as I'll refer back to the segment with the Ocean Insights guys talking about logistics network designs. So when you're looking at a lot of the data we're going to talk about today, you're able to see insights into how large shippers route their freight into the United States. Yeah. Which if you look at regionally, when you're using ports like Los Angeles, Long Beach, how that freight moves inland, oftentimes it stays regionally. In understanding those consignees, their locations, how they're routing freight into the United States into those ports can be very valuable in terms of understanding your prospective clients, or even if your current clients are moving imports and you're not affiliated with those shipments, you're only handling domestic truckload, how much volume is coming in for those guys.
Right. And I think it's really interesting too to see. So we're going to take a look at the demo that Craig and Zach did this morning of one of the new updates in SONAR, particularly around some of those ocean imports. But before we do it, I think it's really valuable to show just how correlated they are. You mentioned the Port of LA, and that really does correlate very closely with the domestic truckload volume. You and I, Kyle and I, we've been looking at this a lot on just our Wednesdays. We show this. Let's flip the chart up here real quick for the viewers to see. What we're looking at, what they're able to see here is in blue is the number of shipments, the weekly maritime import shipments clearing customs in the Port of LA.
Right.
And then in yellow or green is the outbound volume levels for truckload freight out of Ontario.
Yep.
Why, and obviously it's correlated, but why do we look at Ontario here? If we're looking at the Port of LA, why is Ontario's truckload volume so important?
That's a great question. Exactly like we were just referring to with logistics network design, a lot of the warehouses for the Port of Los Angeles, a lot of shippers moving freight through that port end up having warehousing in a bit further away area, Ontario market, encompassing a lot of those warehouses that are just inland from those ports where drayage carriers ultimately deliver to those DCs. And then from there, those outbound tender volumes originate. So oftentimes, while the LAX and Ontario are highly correlated, almost always, Ontario is really where a majority of that freight's moving out of.
Got it. Okay. So now, Kyle, I know you and I, we both work on the SONAR side, and you've been talking to a lot of shippers lately, right? Are the shippers that you're talking to, have they expressed any sorts of bottlenecks that they're having? Because we've seen rejection rates rise quite a bit so far this year.
Yeah, so there's a couple things that's really going on in today's market, which is really, we're having to restock these inventories. So inventories were completely depleted because of all the COVID buying, and so all the networks are really shuffled up. So you're seeing a lot of DCs being bypassed. So with that, you're not seeing the traditional, to Henry's point, all these warehouses in Ontario, typically going from Ontario to the East Coast, you're getting a lot of rail. So a lot of rail volume, and so because we're bypassing this, on really just-in-time delivery, you're getting a lot of truckload volumes being pulled out. So you're getting, more tender rejections in that market. You're getting higher rate per miles to come across from the Southwest to the Southeast, and then really on top of that, just Home Depot, I think, just announced that they're going to have a 2-month Black Friday type of sale instead of that one day. So the more that happens, I think you're just going to see more and more disruption with that, because it's just going to be on-time delivery. And then lastly, Walmart, really enhancing their on-time and full requirements as well. So you're going to see a lot of, potentially disruptions, just because we just want to ensure that things are delivered on time.
I think that's really important too, and that's a good point. We can stick with that for just a moment. So, Home Depot, Target, Walmart, a lot of these large shippers, especially in the retail sector, are creating a lot of changes in their supply network. Before, having worked on the international side, when these shippers have a lot of freight that needs to come to the United States, especially if they're going to sell it for the holiday season, right? It needs to be here a good portion in advance, right?
Yeah, that's arguably, one of the primary reasons why Los Angeles really, volumes, why it was a great leading indicator of what was to come.
Yeah.
Because just the nature of the freight that was coming from China to the West Coast, a lot of it was time sensitive. So you're looking at 16 to 18 day transits. Even a fast boat with somebody like Matson offers 12 to 14 day transit. So really it's the fastest ocean option. So when air rates, which initially took off, I think you saw probably went as high as $12 per kilo. Companies can't afford to do that. So the next best option is that fast boat option from China to Los Angeles and Long Beach.
Got it. And when they're bringing these goods in, that causes, especially for a 2-month long, Black Friday type sale,
right,
when we're traditionally used to maybe a Black Friday and maybe even a Cyber Monday, even that's kind of new. That causes a lot of congestion.
Yeah, it's just like setting a goal for yourself. It's always easy when you have a timeline you can stick to. So now that we have a really prolonged timeline, I think they're going to have to just continually add to these inventory levels, which I don't think anyone's really used to having. We've had this Amazon effect of just really having 2-day delivery. You're able to drop ship really quickly. Now we have all of these disruptions. You got Henry can talk to us about the container volumes that are actually going on these vessels. Whereas a couple months ago, we were really having a lot of blank sailing, so we were really constricting the capacity on that. So, there's a lot of factors here that are really going to cause either pricing to increase or decrease.
Yeah, arguably, it's one of the best times to really show the breadth of data that SONAR has, because when those volumes are coming in, when you see, like we had in blue, the weekly total of import shipments that are being brought in on,
Right.
on the ocean as classified by customs, how those are played out, we have data on the truckload sector and the rail sector. So we're
Right.
monitoring rail volumes. So if those are in international containers and you're not seeing rail volumes to places like Chicago, places like Dallas take off, that shows you instantly they must be pushing into the truckload market. So when we have all those tenders, those electronic tenders being tendered out to carriers, we're able to see in real time what's happening. Is it really shifting into the truckload market? And during the first 2 to 3 weeks, most of it was going in the truckload market.
Right.
And I think if you listen to what's happening right now with the rail lines implementing $1,500, $3,000 surcharges out of the West Coast,
Right.
it's insane. So they're forcing basically a lot of that volume into the truckload sector, which is absolutely, I mean, we had predicted, truckload rates, a month ago, we're going to be at historic highs. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we've seen just that.
And I think we have that validation of that the intermodal spot rates are now higher on certain lanes than the rate per miles that we get from truckstop.com.
Mm-hmm.
And so seeing that, that's really what everyone looks for. When we were brokers, a broker was just a jack of all trades, really. So you're trying to think, okay, my customer has X amount of dollars that they're trying to get this transported for. What's the best way that I can do it and make a little bit extra money? We're all in the business to make money.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was always something that I looked at, which was like, is it cheaper or more expensive to go on the rail?
It also speaks to why it's so hard or so difficult to really rely on historic spot rates, because the nature of what we're dealing with the pandemic, the influx of freight, the shortened transit times, e-commerce, is up, 30%?
Yeah.
You're looking at why it's so dependent on the nature of the industry at that very moment, that day, that hour, because spot rates can fluctuate quite wildly. If you're tendering freight out 3 to 4 days in advance versus 1 day, I think, and that's what a lot of our shippers are reporting out there, is that they're having to push tender lead times as high as possible to keep from paying $2,000, $3,000 more from Los Angeles to places like Chicago.
Yeah,
we're seeing, and I think a big portion of this too is, as we see this coronavirus effect, which then really, ultimately what it's doing is it's really leapfrogging us into this e-commerce world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where things do go online, and it's changing the way people buy things, it's changing the way we work, and that is really changing the supply chain. All of a sudden, the guy that has 20 years of experience in the logistics space, it's not that that experience is invalid anymore. It's just that you can't rely on that historics as much. You need that speed of the data. You need those tenders. You need to understand what these shippers are doing,
Right.
To keep up with that. Now, we had a really big update come out today with the imports by top 100 consignees in SONAR today, right? And that's a big update. Let's flash that up here on the screen. I know we did a quick update on it this morning, but let's go ahead and just walk through this a little bit and tie this in.
Don't want to cut you off really quick.
No, please, go ahead.
Henry is the kind of the creator behind all this, the madness, really the brain. So what were you kind of thinking about of why someone would want to even see this? So what was going through your head while creating this?
So we already have a lot of this data in SONAR currently. That's important to understand. A lot of it is in the CSTM derivative. So ICSTM, CSTM, WICSTM, all those different derivatives are based upon this data. So this is actually a data set that's counting the bills of lading as they're coming into and being cleared through U.S. Customs.
Yeah.
And in this data, what I was thinking is, hey, man, we need to show the granularities, the breadth of this data, and really give it, what it deserves in terms of being able to export a more customizable dashboard. So what we're looking at here is the companies responsible for the volumes. And we've really never done that before in SONAR. We have a lot of data that shows us more intelligence than anyone else as far as what companies are doing on the ground. But I think this is a data set where it just makes all the sense in the world to be looking at this as a top 100 consignees. How much volume are the top 100 importers responsible for? And just like you mentioned with e-commerce, how much more are certain consignees responsible for than others with the advent of e-commerce?
Absolutely. No, I think that's a good point. I went ahead and filtered this to Amazon. Everybody knows Amazon, right? Big player.
Who are they?
Yeah, they're a small company. They're just getting started.
Is that a startup tech company?
Yeah, I think so. It's they might make it. I don't know. But they're getting started.
Yeah.
Anyways. So we click on Amazon, and all of a sudden, walk me through here what we're seeing. So it looks like in the top left we're seeing exports by country. So that's a nice picture. That tells me where their densest export
And that's like
countries
the
are.
darker the blue, just like our haul maps.
Right.
Darker the blue, the more dense the network is there.
Yeah, absolutely. So what you're looking at, when, the deeper the darker blue, the more volumes originating in those countries. So these are the countries of origin for all U.S. imports in the past 30 days for the top 100 importers.
Right.
Yep.
So in this example, it looks like Amazon over the last 30 days imported approximately 17,000 TEUs. Of those 17,000, it looks like 14,000 of them are coming from China. So they're very reliant on China. But I guess that makes sense because a lot of their goods are retail, right?
Well, if you click on China, it'll actually filter it down. So then you can see specifically how much. And then you can see all the logistics providers down there in the bottom right, the carriers who are handling it from China. You can see the ports that they're using from China. So that's where that next map comes in, is the darker the blue in this case is where those shipments are being cleared. So California, for instance, handling a lot of those volumes, being a darker blue.
LA, Long Beach.
A lot of those shipments are being cleared through there. So you can reasonably assume that a lot of those, obviously we have information around the consignee location, but a lot of those are terminating there in California and hitting the truckload market.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So that's exactly what we're looking at now. Now, how would, let's say, I guess who is this valuable to? When I see this information, who can benefit from knowing this?
Like I said, when I got into the international industry, this is the data set that I really fell in love with because it just blew my mind that I could see so much granularity in this data set. So logistics providers, bar none, I think are going to get the most value out of this. So when you're a logistics provider and you're looking at Amazon, right, and let's just say you currently aren't handling volumes for Amazon, but you're wanting to, maybe you have a big meeting with them, you can see what ports they're utilizing, you can see what countries they're importing from, you can see the logistics providers. So if you look deep into that data, you can see, Maersk and Zim Lines are actually the top ocean carriers that are managing freight for them. And then you can see Crystal Lines and, if I'm not mistaken, who's the other one? DSV are the two top NVOCCs. So in Crystal Lines, if you don't know, their NVOCC name, that's actually C.H. Robinson. So when you're going to meeting with Amazon and you're saying, okay, we know which ports you use, we know how much volume you're bringing in, we know that you're using C.H. Robinson, DSV for your ocean freight, and maybe you have a more niche, case for them doing business with you. But also, look at everyone else. You have access to all the other top 100s, and if you get the raw API feed from us, you can get access to every single importer in the country. So no matter who you're calling on, these guys handle tons of truckload freight, right? Just like we mentioned, over 70% of all this, we estimate, ends up in dry van truckloads. So you basically have an enormous lead list that you can get really targeted on commodities, locations, ports, or anything else, just depending on which segment of the logistics market you're operating in. Are you a broker, dray carrier? That's going to dictate a lot of what you're interested in.
What strikes out to me here, and this is coming from someone, I didn't work in the ocean or international sector, but transparency is the name of the game, right? And I think the more transparency that's available to more parties really helps not just level the playing field, but just reduce the uncertainty, right? If let's say Walmart's a customer of mine, right? I can show them, hey, here's what Amazon's doing. You obviously compete together a lot, right? Walmart's another small startup. Don't worry about them. They're tiny. Yeah, they're up and coming.
Listen, you're going to have to speak slower for the people out here, not for me, but just for everyone else.
Walmart, look them up. They're brand new. But no, seriously. So Walmart and Amazon, so all of a sudden you can show them what's happening and see where you could provide that extra level of service or provide visibility.
What's interesting about Amazon is they're actually an NVOCC now. So they actually, if you were them and you're about to roll out, say you're a big shipper, you're looking at doing an NVOCC, how Walmart's handling and managing their freight is very meaningful. So if you're looking at what carriers are they using, you need to know who you're competing with for the space on those vessels. If you're moving a lot of freight with Maersk and MSC and Walmart's dictating 80% of all the volumes that are going on those ships, and now we just heard reports that they're importing 100 to 200% more volume. And keep in mind, they do 839,000 TEUs annually. That's a ton of freight moving. So you're going to get knocked off the boat because Walmart dictates a lot of that market because there's only 9 large ocean carriers that dictate over 90% of all world trade or containerized trade.
Right.
So if you're Amazon and you're now an MVOCC, is it advantageous of you now that you know what Walmart's doing, right? Can you then go out and build relationships with other folks that are moving stuff on their same trade lanes?
Well, you could just knock, Walmart off, and you could just literally look at this data set absent all the consignees, and literally just look at what ocean carriers are best in these countries. So what I would do as an NVOCC is I would go in and I'd look at, if we're moving into Vietnam, we used to move a lot of freight for someone like Ashley Furniture. I'm going to go into the NVOCC list, see who the top NVOCCs are, because I need an agent in those countries. I need a partner. So then I start, emailing them, because they're obviously handling the most volume and dictating really the most. They can offer the most capacity on these ships coming from Vietnam. So you have the best chance of partnering with somebody like that, and getting the buying power that you need to get on those ships. Yeah. It just speaks to the incredible amount of data that's in here.
And I think we touched on this a little bit. Let's go a little bit deeper. So for the individuals who maybe just move truckload freight, they only work for a 3PL, right? How can they leverage this information to maybe expand their business or differentiate themselves from the other 3PLs?
I would highly encourage all of those people to be utilizing this data, because some of the best success we've had in terms of return on investment has been with just truckload carriers like that. So a lot of truckload carriers and a lot of competitors to the people that are watching today, some of them are getting so sophisticated where they're studying this data, and we were having conference calls when the coronavirus first hit about what shippers are going to be most impacted in Wuhan, Shanghai, Los Angeles. They wanted to be ready, because they knew the moment that volume starts to be unleashed again, the moment China starts hitting production again, those guys are going to need our services the most. Yeah. And they've had, I can't really disclose a lot of the returns numbers per se, but the returns are incredible, because they're getting so targeted. They know where they have excess capacity. They know where their trucks are empty. They know where they're going to the brokers for backhauls. The best thing for them to do is to go to those shippers directly, because they have a better chance of having control over their destiny. So when they're in places like Dallas and they say, oh, we have a bunch of empty trucks, I can draw them a radius and say, here are all the importers in this region, within 100 miles. And here are all the ones that move automotive parts, which is what your head haul was just composed of. So when they call that client, they're saying, hey, we have a bunch of head haul freight from Chicago to Dallas. We move automotive parts. We would love to handle your Dallas to Chicago freight. And they're having great success doing that type of thing.
That's how a lot of these large carriers eventually got in their business. I mean, even things like CRST, like people who are just naturally doing backhauls, you being Access America and going to Coyote, which is really backhaul centric. So that's really just finding those opportunities to capitalize on.
Yeah, if you think about the brokerage, I mean, it exists because the inefficiencies in the market.
Right.
And it, just like you mentioned, transparency ultimately creating more efficiency in the market. This is one of those ways it's going to do that. Right. So if you're a truckload carrier and you're looking at all these importers, if you think about somebody handling hundreds of containers annually, how much truckload volume do they move?
Probably a lot.
Exactly. So great prospects across the board. And I can tell you, in this data set, there's over 50,000 importers that manage hundreds of containers annually. So you're talking about an enormous amount of prospects.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. So we've got, not only do we have the best truckload data in terms of knowing where the volume is. Like if I'm a truckload carrier, you've got where the volume is, where the capacity crunches are, you can look at the rejection data to understand what sort of problems shippers are having, where their bottlenecks are, where the freight is. But also, I think this is even a better upstream look at being able to position your trucks in a certain area. Correct? Am I thinking along that correctly?
Well, these shipments are actually being cleared through customs before they ever are able to be picked up.
Right.
And we get this data. I would say that we're the fastest to market with this data. We have the data for yesterday already in SONAR.
Sure.
So you're seeing what's happening on the ground for yesterday in those markets. So if you see Amazon, for instance, or 99 cents only, or whoever. If they have a bunch of shipments that cleared yesterday, a lot of those shipments haven't ever hit the truckload market, the intermodal rail markets, or any other domestic U.S. freight markets, LTL or anything like that. So yeah, I'd say it gives you a ton of insights into regionally where you can help fill capacity.
Yeah. Now you say we're the fastest with this data. We have everything from yesterday. What's the industry standard?
It's usually, well, you got to think about how this data used to be given. So it'd actually be put on a CD-ROM and actually sent to you via U.S. mail. And now the government's got a little more sophisticated. They're actually sending it over in an FTP. So it's we get it literally for the day yesterday. But it used to be about 5 to 6 days. That's what I would say.
6 days.
Yeah.
Okay, good. And you mentioned too. So this data is so we're seeing it that quickly. and we're able to see what these companies are importing, right? About how long does it take for it, let's say once it's imported to turn into truckload volume? Because that takes a little bit of time.
Well, once it clears customs, you're free to, it's customs released, meaning that freight can now move inland. So a lot of times, you're trying to coordinate those pickups in tandem whenever those are cleared and going to be ready. But if they're not, then that delays that pickup. So normally it's about 1 to 2 days after they're clear before they actually get picked up. And in a case like Los Angeles, it could be 3 to 4 days, depending on congestion levels, things like that.
Wow.
And if I don't mind adding one thing about the LTL carriers, the reason this is specifically valuable for these guys is you can see all the LCL shipments in this data. So if you wanted to see, sometimes for one bill of lading, you'll actually have a number of house bills of lading, meaning a number of actual shipments within just one container. And if you're already managing LTL freight for somebody who's in one of those containers, how easy would it be to go to everyone else in those containers and say, hey, I'm already offering LTL services for someone who's in your same container.
Right.
Would it make sense for me to move yours as well?
Wow. Did get a comment on the Slack channel. Caitlin Murphy is giving you some kudos over here.
Appreciate it.
Calling you a baller in her opinion, but
she's not wrong.
Definitely not wrong.
Not us, but yeah.
I met Caitlin, I think it was in Atlanta, one of my first conferences. She's very cool.
And so she said I wonder if there's a way to integrate blank sailings or if that data is public.
We are working on that. That goes back to our ocean bookings report. So we're actually looking forward at what's originating overseas before it ever hits those boats. So yeah, Caitlin, we would love to work with you on that actually, and look at implementing our AIS data where we're tracking all the world's cargo ships and say, okay, here are the ships that are the blank sailings, here are the predicted cargoes supposed to go on that ship, here are the customers that are supposed to be on there as well.
Right.
And you kind of get a full picture as far as what gaps are going to be left hanging as a result of the blank sailings, and obviously what impacts that'll have on things like rates.
Now that sounds pretty impactful. That's got to be, I'm going to guess that's not quite
it's
as
like
mainstream.
SONAR 8.0? No, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe it's SONAR 9.0. But yeah,
No, but
Next week, folks, we'll be live. Just kidding.
It's both sides of the equation, right? Because
Right.
we have the demand side. We're seeing who's shipping. We see how many containers are coming through, and so the supply, which really coming from how many vessels are going to be actively on the water, because there's only a limited amount. Like you said, I mean, really it's not like the truckload market where you have almost an infinite amount of carriers you can use ultimately, but there's just a set amount of carriers that you have available at your disposal.
Yeah, and if you think about transparency, I mean, only when we get to a point where we're able to see out into the future what cargoes are coming in, what time frame they're coming in at, what's their predictive ETA, like Ocean Insights was referring to, are we going to really be able to get the market a lot more efficient, in my opinion? Because a lot of the times those volumes come off and no one really knows what's going to happen to them. They're being scheduled 2 to 3 days. I mean, you look at like outbound tender lead times. 2 to 3 days right now in Southern California is nuts. It needs to be more like 3 to 4 days, 5 days to keep from getting massive rate increases in the spot market. So again, I think we have a long way to go, but we're getting there.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. With all of this stuff with SONAR, not just the ocean data, the truckload data, I think a lot of this will create those efficiencies, so it will help reduce the cost to shippers when you have those really big increases. But on the flip side, I think it also helps reduce those massive, dips as well that a lot of the transportation providers see as well. So it really helps to level the playing field a little bit.
Yeah, and we're carriers like rates to be high. I mean, I certainly get that from a revenue standpoint, but I think at the same time, there's a lot of inefficiencies for them as well. Detention times go up. You're not generating revenue if the truck's not moving. So I think on the flip side for carriers, there's a lot of upside as well in those efficiencies.
Absolutely. No, that's a good point. And I know we're getting here close to the end of time, but I think this has been a really, really good conversation. Thank you, Caitlin, for tuning in on Slack. Hopefully we can connect more later. So please leave any comments down below in the FreightWaves SONAR Slack channel, or excuse me, the WithSONAR Slack channel. We'll get to them, and we'll continue to develop and just have deeper conversations as things go on. But lastly, thank you, Kyle Taylor, as always, for joining me on WithSONAR, and thank you, Henry, for joining us as well.
Thanks for having
me. And in the meantime, everybody, enjoy the rest of the summit. We've got a great rest of the lineup up, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Have a good one.
Take care.